Daycare workers of Reddit. What is the most shocking family secret you have been told by a 3-year-old? With a group of 3-year-olds we were coloring paper ties for Father's Day and talking about what their dads like to do. As the kids were calling out their dad's hobbies, one little girl had an epiphany. She gasped and shouted in excitement, "I have a dad." She had recently been adopted by her foster parents. I used to work at a church during the summer, and one time a little boy just up and told me as we were walking to chapel that his daddy spanks his mommy with a wooden spoon after they go to bed. Obviously nothing illegal here, but it was a funny story and the parents were informed that their little angel knew of their shenanigans and to have a talk with him. This isn't exactly scandalous. The shocking things I have heard usually involve abuse. We had a family from Texas moved to the daycare I worked at in Illinois. The boy would try and tell us stories, but we never could fully get all the details for it to make sense. It would usually go like this: "Boy, you know who's bad?" "Me." "Who is bad?" "Boy, the black man." "Me." "Who?" "Boy, the black man is bad. He hurts people." "Me." "What man? Why does he hurt people?" "Boy, the black man. He's scary." After a few weeks of this, the boy was the one to always bring the black man topic up. I finally was able to discover that the black man was Darth Vader. I had assumed that perhaps this southern family had a streak of racism, but it just turned out I was prejudiced against southerners. Not sure if this counts. Why friends 1 had a day off from work and a 6-year-old sits at the table next to me and we start talking about different fish in the world. His parents were divorced and they have split custody. He and his sister only come part-time. So I grab my phone and we look up different tropical fish and whatnot. After a bit he tells me he only likes his mom and sister, hates his dad, stepmom, and stepbrother. Talks about how he is going to light his dad's house on fire with the people he hates still in it. I told his stepmom about it when she came to pick him up. He went to therapy for a while. His real mom gets a new live-in boyfriend every month or so. Apparently one has given him swellers a few times and another was a convicted child molester. The dad reports this shoot to CPS, but they never do anything about it. Not really a shocking secret, but it got a laugh out of me. I had my preschoolers rounded up for circle time. Going off their interests of the day, I decided to ask who was a boy and who was a girl, since that's what happened to be the one thing every 3-year-old cared about that day. Through the sea of children I hear a couple responses: "I'm a boy," "I'm a girl," etc. Then out of nowhere all the way in the back I hear "I'm black." He sure was. God, I miss that class. Good times. I once had CPS called on my parents because I told my daycare worker there was nothing to eat and I was starving. True story was my mom hadn't had time to get groceries and asked my dad to go before I left for daycare, saying something like, "Could you pick up the groceries? I don't want her to starve for another day tomorrow." I actually had breakfast that morning, but not the usual, and refused to eat it all. I never saw my mom so embarrassed ever again. My husband and I went on vacation for a week and left my then kindergartner with my meal. The small weirdo was caught eating dog food out of a sandwich baggie on the playground during recess, literally 12 hours after we left. His excuse to the teachers? "Grandma won't feed me." His excuse to grandma? "The dogs like it a lot, so I wanted to try it." Thank everything holy the teachers knew us and grandma. No scary CPS calls were made and everyone save for grandma had a good laugh. Grandma locked up the dog food until we came back. When my son was 3 I bought my wife back Titanic on video. Yes, it was a long time ago. For her birthday. He asked if he could watch it after nursery school. We said that it wasn't really a film for children. It was a film for grown-ups, like Mummy and Daddy. When I picked him up later, his nursery teacher was stifling her laughter as he had been telling everyone all day that it was his mummy's birthday that day and that Daddy had bought Mummy a special video that only mummies and daddies could watch. Little kid, just kind of babbling age. She couldn't talk properly, but could say a few words. She was playing in the little playhouse and I heard her yell very clearly, "Get out of my house, rat bastard." I wonder where she picked that up. I teach 2-year-olds and we were asking the kids what their parents' names were just to see if they knew. I asked a little boy, what's mommy's name? He says, Michelle. Then I asked what's daddy's name? And he looks confused, as if he's trying to figure out the answer, but can't. So I ask, what does mommy call daddy? Assuming he would say John. Instead he looked up at me and says, Big Papa. I couldn't help but bust out laughing. My mom was a teacher, and one time the fire department came in to educate the kindergarten kids. They asked the kids to name different things in the house that are hot. The stove, the fireplace, etc. Then one kid raises his hand and says the weed is hot. I don't think anything ever came of it. It was not the nicest neighborhood and this kind of thing wasn't all that surprising. IDK if this counts. But a 3-year-old told me he had belly aches every day because mommy gave him too much sleepy juice. I said what's what? He didn't know. I brought it up to her and she said like it was all normal and fine, even with a little laugh. Yeah, sometimes I give him a little bit too much NyQuil because the little shoot doesn't sleep, and I was like no child that age should have any NyQuil. She laughed it off and said oh he's been getting it since he was a year old. Nothing bad has happened. And on top of that the kids always came in smelling like strong weed. CPS was called. I once had a little girl tell me she saw daddy licking mommy like a doggy. That was hilarious and awkward. There were a handful of really sad cases where children would disclose neglect or abuse. One girl in particular had a meltdown one day when she had an accident in her underwear. Turned out that her mom would slap her around just gently enough to not leave mark and lock her in a closet when she misbehaved, which included accidents. Needless to say we reported the mother to CPS and did a rush job washing the girl's clothing so she could go home in the same clothes she wore to school without her mom knowing about the accident. Lots of kids spilling the beans on new pregnancies or divorces, arguments between parents, or infidelity. Kids see and hear a lot, and they tend to have incredibly good memory for that kind of stuff. I had a 3-year-old come to class with little red circles on his arms, legs, and back after spending the week with his dad. He told me that daddy burns him with his hot smelly sticks when he was mad. Dad was burning the kid with cigarettes. Definitely got CPS involved. When I was a preschool teacher, we got a new student who would describe her home life to us. After one time she told a story that basically translated to her mom clogging the toilet and her dad struggling to unclog it. She would tell us so much about her home life. We even warned her mom be careful because she would repeat everything she sees. I was a nanny, and one time the 3-year-old asked me, out of the blue, why do daddy and mommy always go back to our clearly sexual noises after bedtime? I just burst out laughing and said that maybe they are working out. I dated a girl with 2 kids. I was watching them while she went to the doctor. She had a serious medical problem and she wanted the kids to not be there and see her all stressed out. Was watching Toy Story with her 3-year-old daughter. I guess the daughter started understanding that her mom and I are more than friends. She said, would you hit mama? I was shocked, and I said of course not. What put that idea in your head? And she teared up and said my daddy used to hit her, and she started crying. I just did my best. I explained to her that I would never hurt any of them and how people who love each other should behave, and that her dad had a sickness that caused him to act strangely. He was an addict. I got her a popsicle and she calmed down as Buzz Lightyear and Woody were flying into the car. I was aware that their dad hit their mom, but I didn't know the daughter witnessed it or would even remember. My grandma owns a home daycare, and a female toddler that she babysat decided to try and pull down a male toddler's pants and kiss his pee-pee. My grandma immediately asked her where she learned that, and she said my daddy. My grandma reported it, and an investigation was done, and her family was actually very grateful that she did it. Even her dad. An investigation was done, and they found nothing wrong and the parents 100% cooperated. Kids sometimes just say odd things, but they were glad to know that my grandma takes those sorts of things seriously. So I guess it's not a family secret, but my grandma certainly thought it could have been at the time. When my daughter was 2, I had her little brother. Sometime when he was around 9 months old, she got pretty sick of him, and she was also in her daddy is king phase. So she would go around saying, "Daddy is my daddy, but has not little brother's daddy." I always wondered if she spread that rumor at daycare as well. Not a secret, and not a daycare worker, but I do work with young children at a private tutoring company, but a little girl just turned 6 at my workplace once turned to another girl who was being disruptive, and calmly said, "Go and see a therapist, darling. You sound like you need one." It was hilarious at the time, but also kinda sad that the girl had heard that phrase often enough to be able to parrot it during an argument. I had a kid call me a beach before and slap me on the face. That one was fun. He was in the foster system, so he had already been through some things, I'm sure. It wasn't a secret, but having a pair of 4 to 5-year-old sisters reveal to me the details of their father's motorcycle accident that led to his death was heartbreaking. It all starts with my daddy is dead and ends with he wasn't wearing a helmet. Spoiler alert, the story is terribly tragic and lengthy. Oh, a girl who has a questionable home life pointed to a cop car and said, "It's the popo. They took mommy away once and now I don't have a mommy anymore." Not super shocking, but I worked at a daycare for a couple of years and the 2 stories I remember the most was when a little girl said to me, "When daddy takes a bath mommy shaves his back," and another little girl that admitted when her dad watches her in the tub, sometimes he would drop a turd in the toilet. That latter one, her dad came to pick her up that day and I could not look him in the eye. Pretty mild, but a surprising and cute slip up. I was working in a 4-year-old classroom. We are drawing pictures, having a great time, and a little girl is showing off her art. There's a stick figure for mommy, daddy, little sister, herself, and one more. They're a family of 4. I inquire about the 5th stick figure, and the artist casually says, "Oh, that's the baby in mommy's belly." Dad came to pick up that afternoon, and we delicately asked if his wife was expecting. Not everyone liked to share that info, especially early on. His response, "Oh shoot, we forgot to tell daughter she couldn't tell anyone yet. Busted via preschool art." Oh my, I can't believe this isn't one of the first ones that popped into my head. There was a little girl and boy, about 3 and 1. They were in foster care and had great foster parents. Well, they would get picked up about once a week by a social worker and taken to their parents for visits. Well, one time, when they came back from the first UN supervised visit, the little 1-year-old started breathing really heavy and raspy, and then all of a sudden barely breathing at all. We think maybe a allergic reaction to something. Of course we call an ambulance. Then not even 10 minutes after he's off to the hospital, it happens to the little 3-year-old. But she starts throwing up too, and then not being able to breathe. So we are all like, WTF is going on? The owner goes to the hospital with the kids and calls later to let us know what is going on. Turns out the real parents poisoned both of the kids. They turned out okay. The little boy had a lot more in his system and was in the hospital for a few months. But overall, everything went back to normal. Needless to say, the parents went to prison. Their reason for doing it was because if they couldn't have them, then no one else was raising them. Which made no sense because they were fairly close to getting them back. You never know how shooty some parents can be until you work in childcare. Edit. Because so many people have asked me this. I mean the owners of the daycare, not of the children. Had a 3-year-old tell me and other teachers that my vagina hurts. Not exactly a sign of abuse, but I had to tell the director who did an investigation. Old girlfriend's mom used to travel for work often and would leave her with her father for days on end. She says that her daughter would say that she was warm belly when mom came back from her trips and cold belly when she was gone. Girlfriend's mom figured her daughter just missed her. Come to find out that the dad wasn't feeding her when the mom went on these trips. When we lived in Japan, my son went to a 24-hour daycare. There was one little boy there that was there for 2 weeks before the authorities were brought in. He was abandoned apparently. Not a daycare teacher but the parent. Little one was about 3.5 when I get a very serious phone call from her daycare to come in and talk about a comment my child had made. Jump in the car and zoom there as quick as I could, and there is a police car already there. We get into the office to talk about what's happening. My child had told her teacher the marks on her chest and back were from When I beat her, police officer looks at me and tell me this is very serious and I'm just about to burst into tears because I can't imagine why my beautiful daughter would say such a thing. Then I remembered what was actually on her chest and back and burst out laughing like a maniac. My daughter had hives from her allergic reaction a couple of days before, and they were still slightly visible even with the cortisone cream and antihistamines we were prescribed by the doctor. Had to explain I never beat my child. She had thought that because she had hives it meant she had bees living in her, and by having to take medicine and have a special cream that I was beeing her to get rid of all the bees. Police officer had a good giggle and the daycare teacher looked like she had swallowed some lemons when I pointed out that only hours before I had just handed her all the proper documents, doctor's note, description of her allergy plan etc along with the bag of cream and medication for the hives. Not a daycare worker, but something rather similar. I helped with foster children for a long time, and one who was in the process of being taken from her mother / 3 years old told me giggling that Mel was sucking mommy's bob. Mel was her grandmother. She also told me that when she was a little tiny her mom put her in a crib and a scary man came into the room and grabbed mommy and jumped all over her while mommy screamed, "No, my baby is watching, stop." Had a very troubled little girl who was already taken away from her parents and living with the dubious grandparents. She came in one day with a sizable wound on her head, nearly hidden under a hairband. I was doing one-to-one work with her in the garden when I notice it and ask what happened. She tells me offhand that Granny got angry and threw a toy car. Followed protocol, reported it, and then it was out of my hands. I wish it was the only thing that I needed to report with her. Poor kid. 2-year-old girl to my mother, her nursery teacher. My mother says you're black. My mother, yes, I am. 2-yo. My mother says she doesn't like black people. My mother is obviously black and a nursery teacher in a country where most other black African/American/Europeans people are temporary residents only, so most locals have never really interacted directly with black people. Bonus, this little girl is light brown skinned Arab and apparently was also told by her mother that she is white. Eater. Deets about little girl's physical appearance. Also, I won't go into a debate about the whole Arabs classified as Caucasian or white on censuses in the US thing, but essentially my point was that regardless of if we believe that girl was white or not, her conversation with my mother reflects that she absorbed what her mother told race. That's her introduction to race relations, that her mother doesn't like black people. It was shady on her mother's part at best and irresponsible and potentially damaging at worst. Not a daycare worker, but worked at a summer camp. A year before, one of counselors was arrested for lewd conduct with kids. Though the incident did not happen on camp, the counselor was known by all the kids. The first summer camp after the incident, one of the kids came up to us and asked if we would touch him like the other guy did. Not daycare, but interning at a school. I was in one class a lot and there was that one boy who took to me right away. He seemed a bit lonely and socially awkward and sought out adults rather than other kids. The second day he told me his mom left him and his dad about a year ago because she didn't want him and he had just lost his grandma last month and now he was sad all the time. Another time he and another kid were lingering around after school out, and I jokingly asked them if they could not get enough of school. He said no, he'd rather always be in school because at home he was always alone and that he hated the weekends. Also all his dad did was work and complain. If he could he would want to sleep in school. I really didn't know what to say to that. The kid was super bright and on top of his class but so sad. I talked to the teachers about him and they confirmed he had a pretty sad and fricked up home life. I taught the toddlers, but as the day wound down and the number of kids in the building dropped, they would slowly all trickle into one room for playtime and to basically wait to be picked up. I was the teacher in charge of the end of day playroom as well. There were two 11-year-old twins who were constantly happy, outgoing rays of sunshine. One day, they just weren't. I asked them if everything was okay. Apparently, over the weekend, their family had gone out to dinner and a movie. Took about 3 to 4 hours. When they returned, their house was a bloodbath. Apparently their 3 dogs had gotten into a fight which resulted in one dog dying. The girls walked in on the 2 surviving dogs, covered in blood, eating the third dog. Apparently, their parents enrolled them in therapy almost immediately, and it seemed to help a lot. My nephew outed my brother-in-law for cheating one morning at breakfast. He and my sister were separated, but working it out until little Cam said mistress was over for breakfast this morning. I'm putting together a book for my kiddo for when she graduates high school called Texts from Daycare. I have taken screenshots of all the texts I would get throughout the 5 years she was there. Once I was giving her a bath, I think she was about 3, and she wanted to use my body wash, and I must not have rinsed the washcloth well enough when I cleaned her privates. It burned and I felt so bad. I texted Daycare, her daycare provider is a friend of mine whom I've known since kindergarten, that night, to let her know what happened, because I knew she'd say mommy burnt my hoo-ha. The texts I got the next day could only be described as epic. She said something like mommy used her soap on my hoo-ha, and it burned and I cried. But I told mommy I know she didn't mean it, but don't ever use that burned soap again. I watched TV, and I stopped crying, but then I cried again, because I had hot pee, and mommy felt really bad, so I said no more burned soap. If I weren't so close with my daycare provider, that cold vended very badly, possibly with a visit from DCF. Another fun one, daycare provider was driving and said shoot. Apologized right away, and my kid pipes up from the back seat, that's okay, my mommy says that word all the time. And she says FCK to the cat. I do, that cat is a freaking asshole. In college, I did work study in the campus daycare. One of the little boys, probably about 3, told us that his mom fed him shark with blood last night. It was shark steaks with ketchup. Still funny. Kids I used to babysit had an abusive father. They were afraid of when he would come home. One kid locked himself into a room with his younger sibling and started hitting the window with a stick, saying he was going to kill his sibling and himself. I quit watching them, and the mother begged me come back, but as a teenager it was too much. The mother died under mysterious circumstances a year later. We're pretty sure she was murdered. Those poor kids. I think about them all the time and wonder where they ended up.